Good evening, I'm Fana Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight: Zelensky and European leaders prepare to speak to Trump before summit, and White House calls Trump-Putin meeting a listening exercise. All this and more coming up on AWANI International. European and Ukrainian leaders are preparing to speak with United States President Donald Trump on Wednesday, just days before his high-stakes summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Their goal is clear: to warn him of the risks of trading away Kyiv's interests in pursuit of a ceasefire. Right, Trump is set to host Putin in Alaska, the first US-Russia summit since 2021. In European capitals, fears grew that Friday's summit could produce far-reaching decisions, perhaps even pressure Ukraine into a deal against its will. Earlier today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Berlin and is set to join a video conference with Trump and European leaders. NATO Secretary General would also attend, with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz hosting the talks. Ukraine hoped the call could act as a counterweight to the summit, a reminder that no agreement about Ukraine should be made without Ukraine itself. Meanwhile, the White House says Friday's Alaska summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin is a moment to listen, not to strike a deal. According to them, with only one side in the war present, any hope of an immediate ceasefire will have to wait.
Instead, the meeting was intended to give Trump a clearer picture of the conflict and ways peace might be reached. The White House had also hinted that a future trip to Russia could be on the cards. Previously, Trump had suggested both sides might need to give up territory to end the war. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected this, noting that his country's constitution forbids such an agreement without Ukraine's direct role in talks. The White House stayed silent on any private discussions between Trump and Zelensky before the meeting with Putin. However, Trump had hinted that Zelensky could join a future round of talks. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Alexei Fadiev says Friday's Trump-Putin meeting will cover all accumulated issues in bilateral ties. He added that Russia's position on ending the Ukraine war, set by President Vladimir Putin in June 2024, remains unchanged. At the time, Putin demanded Ukraine to fully withdraw from 4 regions claimed by Russia but not fully under its control.
We have more after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi may visit New York next month for the UN General Assembly, where he may meet US President Donald Trump, according to the Indian Express newspaper. However, an Indian official says his attendance is still not confirmed, as the September 26 general debate speakers list could change.
The General Assembly opens on September 9th, with the leaders' debate scheduled for September 23rd to 29th. According to the newspaper, if the trip proceeds, Modi's key objective will be to hold talks with Trump to resolve trade and tariff disputes that have strained bilateral ties. The meeting comes after Trump's announcement of an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods, in response to New Delhi's continued purchase of Russian oil. This raises the total levy on Indian goods to 50%, one of the highest on any US trading partner. Trade negotiations between the two nations collapsed after 5 rounds over disagreements on opening India's farm and dairy sectors and ending Russian oil imports.
The time for a partial hostage release or phased ceasefire is behind us, says Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister says ceasefire efforts in Gaza are now focused on freeing all remaining hostages at once as conditions in Gaza worsen. In a TV interview, Netanyahu renewed calls to allow Palestinians to leave Gaza as the military prepares its broader offensive. This as Hamas negotiators in Cairo are pushing for a 60-day truce. The World Health Organization, meanwhile, has urged Israel to stock medical supplies in Gaza ahead of its planned takeover of Gaza City, warning of a catastrophic health crisis. Foreign ministers from 25 countries, including the UK, Canada, Australia, and other European allies, had also released a statement saying how humanitarian suffering has reached unimaginable levels and demanding a surge of aid into Gaza. Israel had denied responsibility for hunger in Gaza, but recently announced partial daily pauses in fighting and designated aid routes. But much more aid is needed, with some countries turning to airdrops. Indonesia is the latest, delivering 800 tons of assistance. In other news, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has ruled out Chinese investments in the country as part of any trade pact. As Washington and Beijing has agreed to extend a pause on higher tariffs, this could possibly curtail options for resolving the ongoing trade dispute.
In an interview with Fox News, Bessent was asked if China could make billion-dollar pledges like Japan, South Korea, and the EU, to which he replied no. Bessent stated that funds from buyouts would be directed towards critical industries needing to be reshored, specifically away from China. He cited sectors like semiconductors, rare earth magnets, pharmaceuticals, and steel, where Chinese investment is not anticipated. Bessent also said he will meet Chinese counterparts in the next 2 to 3 months after both sides extended their truce for 90 days, stabilizing trade ties while talks continue. He also stressed that Washington needed long-term action from Beijing to curb chemicals used in fentanyl production before easing duties.
The U.S. condemns any actions by Thailand or Cambodia that violate or undermine the ongoing ceasefire. U.S. Ambassador to Malaysia, Edgar Kagan, calls on both countries to take appropriate actions to fully enforce the truce.
We obviously condemn actions by either side that call into question the ceasefire, that violate the ceasefire. I don't want to take a position on who's responsible. I think that we're waiting, obviously, for there to be an independent mechanism that is best able to adjudicate that. But we definitely call on both countries to take all appropriate steps to ensure that their military and civilian personnel are doing everything possible to enforce the ceasefire, and that neither side takes provocative actions or makes provocative statements that could endanger the progress that's been made so far.
Kagan was commenting on Thailand's allegation that Cambodia breached the ceasefire after a Thai soldier was injured by a landmine along the border. He also praised U.S. cooperation with Malaysia in securing last month's agreement between Thailand and Cambodia, which was reached after 5 days of heavy fighting. Kagan was speaking at celebrations marking the 249th U.S. Independence Day at the St. Regis Kuala Lumpur, where he reaffirmed Washington and Putrajaya's partnership as well as commitment to freedom, peace and prosperity.
The relationship obviously always has its challenges, but I think at the basis we share so much in terms of a commitment to peace, prosperity in the region, our security partnership, our economic partnership, and our very strong people-to-people ties are the bedrock of what brings us together so we can solve problems together.
United States Ambassador to Malaysia, Edgar Kagan, has reaffirmed Washington's commitment to transparency in its trade approach with Malaysia. Speaking exclusively to AWANI International, he espouses President Donald Trump's views that existing trade terms are historically weighted against the U.S.
I think that I can understand the question. However, my response is, one, the U.S. has been very transparent. I think that President Trump has long believed that the terms of the trading relationships were biased against the United States. And look, I haven't heard any Malaysian who has really seriously questioned the idea that the U.S. market is more open to Malaysia than the Malaysian market is to the United States. So I think that the steps that have been taken reflect a decision by the government of Malaysia to try and take appropriate actions to promote and preserve the trading relationship with the United States, which is in itself the best evidence of the recognition of the importance and the value that they bring.
Looking ahead, Kagan said the true strength of US-Malaysia ties lie in their shared history and enduring values. Commenting on his expected successor, Nick Adams, Kagan believed any future ambassador had to uphold those values, namely liberty, democracy, and stability amid a shifting global and regional landscape.
This week on Wu Says, we take a closer look at the bigger picture around the world when it comes to tariffs. Among the questions pondered were, did Malaysia had a good tariff deal? Melissa Idris discusses this with Professor Emeritus Dr. Wu Wing Tai.
We got a deal that Trump has arbitrarily benchmarked to Indonesia. Indonesia, as you know, more than a week before us, got a 19%, together with the demand that Indonesia opens up its many of its agricultural markets and to buy airplanes from Boeing. In the case of Malaysia, we also have 19%, and we just placed an order for 30 more planes from Boeing on top of the 23 that we had ordered before. And we are going to be taking a new look at the import of halal food from the United States. Malaysia has had quite stringent restrictions on the import of food because of the halal content, halal procedure requirement. And the Americans have now argued that they're just as good in dishing out halal food as we are. And furthermore, the negotiations are not all done yet because there are still negotiations on certain deregulatory steps that are not specified. One thing that the Americans have not insisted on is the amendment of government procurement procedures, because right now the government's procurement practices tends to favor a particular community over other providers, which means that it shuts out the Americans as well as some other communities in Malaysia. This is a red line that I think Anwar talked about, and which the Americans have chosen not to demand concessions on. But this is, you got to understand, the Philippines also got 19%, so has Cambodia, so has Thailand. So the 19% is clearly a line they drew up for this group of potentially, these are important countries for U.S. strategic consideration. So we will treat them quite uniformly.
Okay. So
Vietnam is 20%.
Catch the full conversation of this on all AWANI International social media accounts.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts. I am Fanashi. Thank you for watching and good night.